I don't want no oil a-spoiling my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus. Good evening, Bowling Green, and hello to everyone on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and hopefully at some point I'll be joined by my co-host, Rebecca Wood, for a Green Future. Yeah, For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment. And we talk about it in the ways that it affects you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and families and co-workers, and the birds that are getting ready to migrate, and the fish that are getting ready to ready for winter, and basically everyone and everything, because, like it or not, we're all wrapped up together on this wonderful planet called Earth. And we have a wonderful show lined up for you today. I am actually not in Ohio at the moment. I'm in Western New York, and I'm broadcasting because I had to have a little get-together with my high school buddies. We had our 45th reunion. And so we're going to just chat for another 10 minutes or so. And then we have an interview with Keving Kamps, who's going to give us a update on the situation up there in Michigan, where they're talking about restarting the evil Palisades nuclear plant. And then we'll hear from our advertisers and sponsors, and hopefully at some point we'll hear from Rebecca, and then it'll be Ecological News after that, and that will be our show. We've got a lot to talk about, so we've got a little bit of a late start because of technical difficulties, but let's plow on through. So, as I said, I'm in Western New York for my 45th high school class reunion. I went to a tiny little Catholic high school, and we had a nice little reunion. About 13 of us managed to make it out to the reunion, which is like about a quarter of the class. And it was really nice. We talked about a whole bunch of things, but one thing we didn't talk about was politics, because that's kind of in U.S. culture right now. You just don't talk about politics, not if you want to have a nice evening. And I think that that's actually not a good thing. I think that we need to be able to talk about political stuff. In other countries, like in Europe, people talk about politics the way we talk about the weather. And I think that's one reason their democracies are actually much stronger than ours right now, because talking with people about politics is sort of the basic level of political participation. It's sort of essential to having a democracy. But we avoided it, and we had a very nice time. Everybody had a very nice time. It was just interesting to see how people are doing. One thing we did manage to talk about was some global warming, because I don't look at global warming as political. I look at that as a scientific issue, and I think that even our most conservative classmates are finally able to hold their tongue when people talk about global warming, because just the evidence is so overwhelming, and the surveys are showing 80% of Americans believe it and accept it. But we have a story coming up in the Eco News section that explains how, even though it's only a tiny minority of people that no longer believe in global warming, how it is that they're actually the ones controlling policy. But one sad note, of course, with a 45th class high school reunion, is that we had a number of people who have passed away. We had a nice little table with some candles and some pictures of most of them, and really miss them. They're some really fun people that died too young. And the overwhelming reason was cancer. And I have a person, our class president wasn't able to make it because she is currently battling cancer and just had a round of chemo, so she wasn't up to coming out. And I talked to another classmate who, like me, lost his lifelong spouse to cancer. And it's just a reminder that most of the cancers we have are environmentally caused. And things like the radiation that nuclear power plants are putting into the environment, and chemical pollution and things of that nature, we know what causes global warming, or we know what causes cancer, and we are, for some reason, turning around and putting the worst possible things into the environment, and they want to increase the rate. They want it to happen more, and it doesn't make any sense at all. So once again, in the green future, once we have ecological wisdom kind of controlling our policies, our environmental policies, we will not have as much cancer. Cancer will go down. And we see that in places that have nuclear power plants, and their cancer rates go up while the nuclear plants are running. But once the plants are closed, their cancer rates immediately start dropping, because they stop putting the stuff that causes the cancer into the environment. It's pretty basic stuff, pretty straightforward. But one thing that we have forgotten is that we can control pollution. We can regulate these things, because it's been drilled into our heads that somehow government regulation is just bad. But often government regulation is what protects us from things like cancer. And so in that case, government regulation is good. Okay? We have to get that programming out of our head that all government regulations are somehow bad, because it's government regulations that have allowed us to have life expectancies into the 70s, right? Even though in the U.S. our life expectancy is dropping as we drop our environmental standards, in places like Europe, their life expectancies are continuing to increase as they continue to increase their government regulation of things like pollution and, radiation and chemical pollution. And so, once again, the title of our show is For a Green Future, and this look back over the 45 years. 45 years ago, we were all, as a society, kind of confident we were going to continue to improve the environment, that we were going to continue to regulate, and we have been derailed in that. But luckily, we can get back on those rails. It's never too late to start protecting the environment, just like it's never too late to stop smoking. Even if you are a chain smoker, if you manage to quit, you'll immediately see improvements in your wind and, your ability to do stuff. Once we stop coddling these polluters and actually start regulating them again, we will see immediate improvements. Now, one place that they are not regulating, one place that they're actually making things worse again is Palisades, Michigan. And we have an interview here with our good friend Keving Kamps, who's giving us the latest update on what's going on up there. And there's kind of a breaking story there, because I've never seen this anywhere else, reported anywhere else, but it turns out that right around the Palisades nuclear plant, there is a tremendous thyroid cancer increase. So, all right, so I think let's go to that interview with Kevin now.
Hello and welcome back to For a Green Future. Could you please share with us your name and your organization?
My name is Keving Kamps, and I serve as radioactive waste specialist at Beyond Nuclear.
Okay, so I asked you on today because there's been some developments up there in Michigan. An announcement about the Palisades nuclear plant. Could you tell us what that announcement was and what Beyond Nuclear's reaction is?
Yeah, just a couple days ago now, Holtec claimed victory at Palisades, transitioning from decommissioning status, where it's been since May 20th of 2022, when supposedly for good, until now, and they're claiming operational status as of a few days ago. It's very telling that Holtec International made the announcement and not the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I think it's very appropriate, because the tail wags the dog. Holtec tells NRC what to do. So what it means is that they are still full steam ahead trying to restart this closed reactor, which is unprecedented. We've been calling it a zombie reactor from the start since 2022. We're about 3.5 years into this nuclear nightmare. But what's also very interesting is that there are a number of unresolved major items yet to go, but apparently Holtec is quite confident that NRC is going to rubber stamp those lingering needed permissions and approvals. And they're probably right. The NRC is worse than I've ever seen it. I've been doing this rubber stamp agency, completely captured by the industry. They're supposed to regulate. But we will continue to fight issues on appeal to the NRC commissioners. They have to approve everything that the staff and the Atomic Safety Licensing Board has already approved. It looks like they're just going to store it all up in one big logjam and then bust it loose at a certain point. Holtec, by the end of this year, to actually restart. And so lining up to look that way, but we also have federal court appeals planned. We're just going to fight this at every turn with everything we have, given what's at stake, which is the entire Great Lakes.
So operational status at this point does not mean ready to throw the switch.
Just recently, within the last few weeks, Holtec asked for another major fire protections. And what's ironic about it, what they're asking for is years or even decades of further delay on implementing fire protections, which could cost millions, could cost tens of millions, could cost $100 million. I don't know the exact figure. But what's ironic is that they have been dragging their feet on that for 50 years already. This is the 50th anniversary year of a major fire at Browns Ferry. Unit was started in the first place by a worker, an inspector, who was checking for air leaks in cable that controlled safety systems coming out of the control room. And the reason the fire started was he was using a candle to check for air leaks in this cable tray, looking for a breeze. And that candle set the insulation on fire, and it burned throughout the innards of this control room area. And we almost had a major meltdown at Browns Ferry Unit 1 in 1975. sheer loss. It's never implemented fire protection upgrades in response to Brown's Ferry 1975. Owner Consumers Energy admitted it to the state of Michigan that we need to upgrade fire protections. But they never have. Why wouldn't they? Because NRC never required it. And then 9 years ago, there was a major safety scandal at Palisades when security guards had falsified their logs. They were overworked, they were overburdened, they skipped doing the fire patrols, the only ones ever held accountable. The company was never held accountable for overburdening their security guards, stationary devices that could take the place of physical walkarounds, but that would cost money. And I just tell exemption from regulations a few weeks ago. That process has not worked its way out. But without final approval, or they think they're going to get a rubber stamp before they restart, that's the kind of rigged process we've been up against, forever. But in this particular case, because restarts are unprecedented, and this reactor is infamously unsafe, you'd think that they would try to do things right, but it's quite the opposite.
Couple surprises for me in your press release on this notice of getting ready to be operational again. I did not know about the community that right around Palisades that has, for the numbers, astronomical rates of thyroid cancer. Could you tell us about that?
Yes. The Palisades Park Country Club is an interesting resort community. It's 105 years old. They have about 200 cottages. They lost some of their cottages to the Palisades nuclear power plant back in the mid-1960s. Eminent domain was exercised, I believe. Some of those cottages got taken out and taken over by the nuclear plant. So this Palisades Park is right south. And one of the residents, who is a dentist, has talked to his neighbors and counted up how many past, present, and his count is 50, which is really shocking, as you said, because 3,000 people. And these are part-time residents. Most Palisades Park residents come from places like Chicago. They may spend the entire summer there or a part of the summer. All those folks are about to leave to go back home right now. It's Labor Day, so they're going to go back to Chicago and wherever else they're from, 1,000 people. In the wintertime, it dwindles to a few hundred, I think, out there. Being exposed to whatever radioactivity releases go on at Palisades under so-called normal operations have acquired this many thyroid cancer diagnoses. There shouldn't be a single thyroid where this disease is, but look at Chernobyl, look at Fukushima, and perhaps look at Palisades. Thyroid in terms of radioisotopes would be iodine-131, which has a short half-life of 8 days, but it is very dangerous to the human thyroid gland. And that has been borne out with thyroid epidemics in Chernobyl, thyroid epidemics in Fukushima. There are other radioisotopes that cause thyroid pathology. Iodine-129, which has an incredibly long half-life, 15.7 million years. So that's 157 million years of hazard. Cesium isotopes, I believe cesium-134 with a half-life measured in a shorter period of time, some years, I think. Cesium-137 with a half-life of 30 years. It would appear fuel damage in the core that has never been revealed publicly, perhaps, that allowed these thyroid attacking radioisotopes to do their dirty work on the next door neighbors. That's one explanation. Mm-hmm. Just to close on this, the NRC and the state of Michigan, when this was raised last year, patted those people on the head in Palisades Park. Spoke size is too small, so no conclusions could be drawn. There are 50 alleged thyroid cancers in a very small population, which should be a major red flag for the protection of public health. And yet the people claiming not bring it up anymore, essentially.
You mentioned possible damage that we don't know about, but we do know about the steam tubes, right, of Palisades. And they are in really bad shape, from what I understand.
Yes. Yeah, it's a live issue still. It's not been resolved. So it's incredible that this grant operational status has been given. 2006, there's this smoking gun document where Consumers Energy was presenting a slideshow to the state of Michigan Public Service to Entergy back in 2006. And they listed the major problems that they didn't have the capability to solve. They didn't have the money. They didn't have the experience. They had a small nuclear fleet themselves of a couple reactors, not even, just Palisades at that point. And so Entergy would fix these problems, but they never did. And one of those problems, in addition to fire protection, was the steam generators needed to. Never did. Why not? Because NRC didn't require it. So along comes Holtec. Incredibly, they took a bad situation and made it very significantly worse. They did not do basic but critical safety maintenance on the steam generators. From May of 2024, for 2 years, they did not implement a wet layup on the steam generators, which is an adding anti-corrosion chemicals like hydrazine, which is the state of Michigan in the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit just granted late last year, gave Holtec some huge quantity of hydrazine permission to dump it in the lake. But they didn't even use the hydrazine like they were supposed to preserve. This was in cold shutdown conditions. So as they heat Palisades back up, the heat, the pressure, the radioactivity is going to attack these steam generators. So we expect our expert witness, Arnie Gunderson, who's a nuclear engineer with 54 years of relevant experience, predicts that it's very likely, it's a high risk that one of these tubes will rupture. The cracking is so bad. And we'll be lucky if it's just a single tube, although it would already release radioactivity to the environment. But if they have a cascading failure of enough steam generator tubes, this is a pathway to reactor core meltdown they are willing to take. Arnie Gunderson, our expert, played a big role at San Onofre. He was an expert for Friends of the Earth. They successfully closed those two reactors due to we are losing on this issue and all others. The company is much more reckless than more reckless than I've ever seen them before. So we are the guinea pigs for a giant nuclear experiment about to begin on the Lake Michigan shoreline, just 35 miles upwind of me, here in Kalamazoo, where I'm speaking.
The company conducting this experiment isn't exactly what you'd call a highly regarded, trustworthy source of information, right? I mean, Holtec has a long history of criminality and lying.
Yes. So Holtec has never operated a reactor, never repaired a reactor, never infamously unsafe as Palisades. But as you say, it's not just inexperience and incompetence, which they've demonstrated time and again in their forte areas of expertise, supposedly, like decommissioning nuclear power plants. I just brought it up at an NRC meeting with Holtec yesterday about the small modular reactors, so-called, they want to build on the same Palisades site. And I pointed out that during decommissioning at Oyster Creek, New Jersey, several years ago, Holtec, or one of its workers or one of its contractors, managed to back a Bobcat into a power pole and knock out electricity for 30,000 people on the Jersey Shore. Thankfully, nobody got hurt that I know of, but there's power supplies to things like the cooling pump. Safety significant systems, even at a closed reactor, they have to cool the waste in the pool, or potential for a mega catastrophe on your hands, because pools are outside radiological containment. So luckily none of that happened at Oyster Creek, but it just shows a situation like decommissioning activities Holtec has managed to screw up. And at Palisades, my point was they're going to have employees. Right now, they have 1,000 to 2,000 contractors running around out there. Now they want to build two. The electric is not small. Two of them. They're going to have, this anthill of activity going on for the next several years out there. What are they going to do wrong and create safety problems out there? But in addition to all that, as you said, they are crooked, they are criminal, just some implicated in a bribery conviction. Again, ironically, at Browns Ferry Nuclear Power Plant in Alabama. Singh bribed an official at Browns Ferry to the tune of $50,000, got caught. The only person who really faced severe penalty that meant something, Krishna Singh, what Holtec got was a 60-day, 6-0 Valley Authority, 2 months. That's a slap on the wrist. They also got a $2 million fine, which again, for a company like Holtec, which gets a lot of money from the federal government for one thing, that's a slap on the wrist. It's a cost of doing business. Once that was all done and paid for, Holtec carried on with that contract as if nothing had happened. That's one example of a very large number of Holtec's crookedness, criminality. They're liars, as you said. I mean, just look at their promise at Palisades from 2020 to 2022 to decommission Palisades. All of a sudden, we're going to restart Palisades. And we got our hands on a document dated July 5th, 2022, bailout application from Holtec to DOE for many billions of dollars in state taxpayer, federal taxpayer, and ratepayer money revealed. And their restart, supposedly to decommission Palisades, laying out in full detail their plans to restart. And then they continued to lie about decommissioning and then hide behind their decommissioning status up until this week, which has prevented us from seeing things. Incredibly enough, from December of 2024 to April of 2025, Holtec clear fuel from the pool into dry casks with no emergency plan because it was going to close. So they decided to just skip exercises and trainings. And that's another update is FEMA has crammed 8 years of exercises and trainings in the last few months at Palisades. They've done something like pushing 50 exercises and trainings out there in the last few months, which should have been done over the course of the last 8 years. So they're rushing a lot of stuff out there.
Well, that's about all we've got time for. Anything you'd like to add?
Well, just another Holtec development recently. I've got my shirt on from the cannabis dump in the world that Holtec wants to open in New Mexico. And a colleague named Nick Maxwell in Hobbs, New Mexico, its business partner on the ground in southeastern New Mexico called the Eddie Lee Energy Alliance. It's a quasi-governmental 2-county and 2-county seat business association. Hobbs, New Mexico, Carlsbad, Eddy and Lee counties. They're most infamous because they are willing hosts for the waste isolation pilot plant, which had an impossible leak of transuranic waste into the environment back on Valentine's Day 2014 that was never supposed to happen, but it did. Exposed workers, cost billions of dollars to supposedly recover from. Well, ALEA, as it's called, started this nuclear push for new industry in about 2008 during the George W. Global Nuclear Energy Partnership. That's where they came from. They partnered with Holtec around 2014, I believe, to do this dump. Wanted to get and agreed to a 30% cut of the proceeds. Holtec's recent letter that we were never supposed to see wants to end that that revenue sharing agreement, and pretty much for the first time ever said that right now it's impossible to go forward with this dump. Grisham, the state legislature, New Mexico is pretty much Democratic across the board, although there's a good Green Party out there, I'd like to add, long has been. And so Holtec has admitted defeat, at least for now, that they can't go forward. Besides, the governor and the legislature still oppose it, as does the congressional delegation, as does the grassroots, who fought hard for that state law and against this dump. And so it's hopeful. I don't believe a word Holtec says. They're pathological liars, to borrow a phrase from Bernie Sanders about Trump. But it's a hopeful sign that at least there's some problems that we're going to keep fighting. In fact, miles apart, the two dumps in the federal court system for going on a decade. We fought it in the NRC licensing proceedings for both dumps. We fought them in federal court. We still are. It's gone all the way to the Supreme Court. There's a possibility it might go back there again. We are patient and stubborn because that's what's required in these fights.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Kevin.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, that was our interview with Keving Kamps from Beyond Nuclear. And apropos of that, I forgot to mention in my intro that we've reported before that New York State Governor Kathy Hochul has ordered the New York State Energy and Research Development Authority to build a nuclear plant somewhere in New York. I have now an unsubstantiated rumor that the decision is to put that nuclear plant in Niagara Falls, New York, which is the American side of Niagara Falls. And if so, if this turns out to be correct, that is like a horrible thing because Niagara Falls is already one of the most chemically contaminated places in the country. And to add nuclear contamination on top of that chemical contamination would just be a terrible, terrible thing. But as I said, that's an unsubstantiated rumor at this point. But it's part of what we do here at Four Green Futures. We try to root out information like that. And the way we're able to do that is with the support of our patrons and sponsors. Four Green Future is brought to you by the Wood County Park District. Imagine a place where nature meets adventure, where you can climb, paddle, fish, and explore. That place is right here in Wood County. The Wood County Park District is here to protect, preserve, and inspire. We conserve natural and cultural treasures so you can enjoy the outdoors like never before. By maintaining green spaces, providing fun programs, restoring wildlife habitats, and leading outdoor adventures. Want to connect with nature? Try your hand at archery, bouldering, geocaching, paddling, rappelling, and more. Whether you're seeking experience or a peaceful retreat, our parks are open every day from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset all year round. Come explore, get outside, experience nature. Your parks, your adventures, waiting for you. Find us online at wcparks.org or follow on Instagram, Facebook, or X, or you can call 419-353-1897. That's 419-353-1897. The Wood County Park District, preserving nature, creating adventure, and inspiring a greener future. And Four Green Futures also brought to you by our patrons. And our patrons are fantastic people who went to patreon.com. That's Patreon. There they searched for For a Green Future. Up popped our Patreon page. They signed up to get a little bit out of their accounts every month, and it comes over to us. And that's how we can afford to bring you this fantastic show, which gives you information you're not going to get anywhere else. So thank you to our patrons. And now, one of the reasons that we have this show is so that we can showcase Rebecca every week. Rebecca, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you just fine. So,
yeah, I had to move to the backyard because somebody was mowing and it's quieter back here. But there's more cicadas, unfortunately.
I can hear them a little bit in the background. They're very soothing. So
yeah,
it's good. So, what are we talking about this week?
All right. Well, being that it is Labor Day weekend, I thought I would talk about a job. There's a job where you can be a forest ranger and you can work for the United States Forest Service. Now, lately there have been some problems at that agency, but in general, it's usually a job. So, yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the USFS. Apparently, efforts to found it started in 1876. There was a guy named Gifford Pinchot who advocated for scientific forestry and managing forests for the public good, which is kind of a new idea. And he had the ear of Teddy Roosevelt. They got pictures of him together and everything, and they worked with some various conservation organizations to make the plan for the national park. Interestingly, it is under the Department of Agriculture, but there's this whole history of the USDA and the Department of the Interior fighting over custody of it. But, so far, the USDA is holding on to it, I guess. And it's grown into something over time that protects millions of acres of forest. So that's kind of cool. Some instrumental legislation in founding it was the Forest Reserve Act of 1891. the Transfer Act of 1905 and the Weeks Act of 1911, all of which made it legal for the Forest Service to exist and to purchase land from private citizens to make national forests and national parks. Some of the ecological successes that the Forest Service has had has been wildfire reduction and reintroduction of wolves into the western United States, and also restoration of some degraded forest ecosystems. A couple things they have not done so well. A century of fire suppression has led to overgrowth in forests, so that they're more vulnerable to catastrophic wildfires and also pest infestations of various kinds, because there's just too much altogether. They've also had insufficient funding, chronically, for forest management and restoration, and the clear-cutting of old-growth forests contributes to carbon loss also that they've allowed, so that's not so good. So yeah, but still overall, a fairly good service that they provide, I think.
Yeah, and they do, they fight. They're the main group that fights the forest fires now on public land. So, all right. Well, thanks for that little discussion of the Forest Service.
You're welcome.
So now it's time to go on to ecological news. And our first story, this is in Renew Economy, August 25th. Title is Corruption Plain and Simple. Trump orders halt of nearly finished offshore wind farm, citing, quote, security, unquote. So what's happened is there was a 704 megawatt wind farm called the Revolution Wind Farm, and it was 80% complete. Almost, 24 or 45 out of the 65 planned wind turbines were already installed and ready to hook up. And the Trump administration, through a fossil fuel lobbyist who runs the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, a fellow by the name of Matt Giacona, just sent a letter to Ørsted, which is the company that owns the wind farm, and said, just turn it off, And all he said was security. Doesn't explain how or why supposedly having wind turbines is a threat to security, when in fact these wind turbines would have powered 300,000 homes, and by providing 700 megawatts of power to homes in Connecticut and Rhode Island. So it actually would have increased security, not decreased it. But when you're a fossil fuel lobbyist and you're running the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, it seems kind of logical to do. Instead, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management is trying to push more gas and oil leases in the Gulf of Mexico, and also in the Cook Inlet in Alaska. And they're also trying to push seabed mining, which we have reported on before, which is an absolutely horrible, destructive thing where you trawl the ocean bottom for nodules, metal nodules. And those are the only things providing oxygen in the deep ocean, so you sterilize the ocean in that process. The governors bordering the wind farm are very unhappy. New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island have all sent letters saying to the president, saying this is ridiculous. It follows a similar shutdown in April of the 810 megawatt Empire Wind Farm, and it was in the article, the quote, corruption plain and simple, was spoken by the Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy, who just looked at it and said, well, oil companies gave Trump a whole bunch of money. He appointed their lobbyist as head of this bureau, and the bureau shut down the wind farm. And yeah, that to me, that does sound a lot like corruption, plain and simple. And we have a related story, our next story. This was in Electrek on August 25th. And the title is, Scientist Exposes Anti-Wind Groups as Oil-Funded. Now they want to silence him. So basically what's happened is there's a organization called the Climate and Development Lab at Brown University, and they went through and they looked at where the money for these, they're called AstroTurf organizations, these supposedly citizen organizations that are fighting wind farms along the East Coast. And they found very direct connections to ExxonMobil, to Shell Oil. Basically, they've published a whole bunch of charts that show essentially, Exxon and Shell and those companies give money to groups like the Heartland Institute. And the Heartland Institute then turns around and gives that money to the AstroTurf organizations like Cooler Heads Coalition and or Nantucket Residents for Right Whales. And they're using the right whale as a pawn. They're trying to claim that somehow wind turbines are going to hurt the whales, when in fact it's global warming that are hurting the whales, because the krill, the North Atlantic krill, which is what right whales need to eat to survive, has declined by 50%. And the reason they declined is that the ocean, the North Atlantic, is getting too warm for the krill. And so global warming is what's killing the whales in terms of taking their food. And also the most direct reason whales are dying is vessel strikes, is getting hit by boats. And 40% of the vessels on the ocean are actually carrying fossil fuel. So the more fossil fuel you have, in other words, the less wind and solar energy you've got, the more ships are going to be in the ocean and the more whales are going to get killed. So they're directly, these groups, quote unquote, that are using the right whale as an excuse to block wind turbines. Actually, what's happening is they are pushing the extinction of the right whale by continuing to push fossil fuels. Next story, WTAP in Washington County, back here on land. This is a story that ran on August 26th. Orphan well explosion in Washington County injures 6, 4 taken by helicopter to hospital. And essentially what happens here in Ohio, we have about 20,000 documented abandoned gas and oil wells. And again, those are just the documented ones. There's a whole bunch more that were never documented. And there is a little program that Ohio has to plug these orphan wells. They've plugged more than 1,200 in the last 5 years. Unfortunately, as I said, there's 20,000, and so at this rate, it would take them about 100 years to plug all the documented oil and gas wells. But a crew was in the process of plugging one of these wells, and apparently oil and methane had oozed up to the surface. And at some point, somehow, there was a spark, and it exploded. This is a huge and growing problem because all these ancient wells, they are lined by metal well casings, and that's supposed to keep the oil and gas away from things like our aquifers and groundwater. And of course, as the years go by, and a lot of these are over 100 years old now, those metal casings break down, and then the oil and gas seeps right into the aquifers and poisons them. So it takes on average 2 weeks to plug a well. If it goes really well, you can do it in an afternoon, but sometimes it takes months because when they closed them, 100 years ago, when they abandoned them, they did things like stuck tree trunks down inside the wells, which worked great at the time, but over the centuries, the tree trunks have decomposed, and now the oil and gas is seeping back up to the surface. So it's a big problem, and our hearts go out to the people who were injured. But once again, it's just another example of the collateral damage that we have from fossil fuels. And this happened in the Wayne National Forest, where they are currently trying to get more oil and gas wells drilled, which would cause more of these problems on down the line. Next story. Speaking of long-term problems, this is an interesting story from the BBC.com, and it ran on August 27th. World War II bombs hamper effort to tackle moorland blaze. And what's happening over there in England, in the North Yorkshire area, they are battling a fire in the peat bog. It's a 10 square mile fire, and it started back on August 11th. And the firemen, unfortunately, as they're trying to battle the blaze, this is an area that in the 1940s was used for tank practice. The people would, drive their tanks around and shoot at targets and stuff. And a lot of these shells buried themselves in the peat and were lost. But what's happening now is the peat has gotten so dry and the drought is so intense, and the fires now burn down deep down into the peat, and they're burning down deep enough to hit these buried artillery shells. And so far in the 2 weeks, there's been 18 explosions of anti-air artillery shells. And this is all part of, according to Euronews, a related story on August 28th, that there's a record amount of wildfire destruction, marks dark year for Europe. So far in Europe, 1 million hectares have burned. That's roughly an area the size of Connecticut. And the whole continent of Europe is experiencing high temperatures and low rainfalls because of global warming, just as predicted by all the models. And so what's been happening is things are basically drying out and burning, and it's not good. So, another thing that basically is because of global warming, and another thing that we can avoid and ameliorate if we stop putting carbon in the air. Next story. This is a good old-fashioned get off global warming and onto sewage, which has long been an environmental problem. A story from WPEC CBS News in Florida, and the title is Judge Halts New Septic Permits to Protect Manatees in Florida Lagoon. And what's been happening since 2022, thousands of manatees have died of hunger, and what they're blaming it on is pollution from septic tanks seeping into these lagoons and clouding the water. And once the water is clouded, then you can't, the seagrass that the manatees eat, that they live on, gets blocked out by the sun and shaded, and so then the seagrass can't grow, and without seagrass you have starving manatees. The Florida Department of Environmental Protections, quote unquote, was convicted of violating the Endangered Species Act by a federal judge who issued this injunction saying you can't permit any more septic tanks being put in right alongside these lagoons because they're obviously poisoning the water and killing off the manatee. The Department of Environmental, quote-unquote, protection is appealing this. They want to approve a lot more septic tanks, I don't know, for some dark political purpose. But essentially what's happening is that a group called the Bear Warriors started a lawsuit in 2022, and they won. And so the judge has ordered things like blocking new septic permits and ordered monitoring of the health of the manatees, which so far the Florida Department of quote-unquote protection is refusing to do, and while they're appealing the whole decision. All right, well, we're racing right along here. Next story, and this one is in The Guardian on August 28th. Title is Collapse of Critical Atlantic Current is No Longer Low Likelihood, Study Finds. I mean, that's one of the most wordy, roundabout ways of saying the AMOC current is likely to collapse. We're talking about the Atlantic Meridional Circulation, the AMOC, AMOC. And if it collapses, it's going to lead to a 2-foot ocean level rise, and it's going to mean that the northern hemisphere around Europe is going to get much colder and drier, and basically we won't be able to grow most of the crops that we currently grow in North America and Europe. We will no longer be able to grow those because there won't be enough rain. The thing is that they've been running models to predict how much global warming is going to damage this current. And the problem was that they would just run the models out to the end of the century, 2100. But what they found was if they ran the models longer, like to 2300 and to 2500, then the global warming, the AMOC current, actually collapses later on. In other words, they didn't run the models long enough to take into account the long-term effects of continuing to add carbon to the atmosphere. And once they did that, they realized, we have tipping points. And those tipping points are as close as like within the next 10 years at our current carbon emissions rate. And so if we don't lower the amount of carbon within 10 years, even if we stop carbon after that, let's say in 50 years or 30 years, we do manage to get to zero carbon, the AMOC current will likely still collapse because of the pollution we've already put in. The models are showing it's a 70% likelihood. So this was actually the study that put this out there was from the Journal of Environmental Research Letters. And unfortunately, we know already that even that model is wrong. It's too conservative, because what's happened is they have left out the addition of the Greenland ice melting. The Greenland glaciers are melting and dumping fresh water in on top of this whole system. And so we know that it's worse than these models are predicting. And so scientists are freaking out, basically. And they actually finally used the positive feedback loop, because what happens is as the amount of fresh water increases, the amount of water that gets sunk into the deep ocean decreases, and that is what drives the whole current. So what's supposed to happen, all right, is that the water flows up from the south, and up there off the coast of Greenland, you get these cold breezes that blow over the ocean and evaporate off a lot of the water. And so the ocean at those points gets saltier and colder, and cold, salty water sinks down to the bottom of the ocean. And then that's where the current flows back down south. The problem is, because the Arctic has gotten warmer, it's no longer cooling the ocean. And because they get fresh water in from both Greenland and rain, that they did include rain in these simulations, that makes the water less salty instead of more salty. So instead of cold, salty water, you end up with warm, fresher water that doesn't sink. And if you don't drop the water down into the deep ocean there, you've cut the conveyor belt at that point. That eliminates the whole AMOC current, because you have to have the entire closed loop for it to do its job, and its job is essential to maintaining our society, because it's essential to keeping our place habitable and to keeping our farmlands farmable. And if the AMOC current collapses, which now looks like could happen within this century, within the next few years, we are we're done. We won't be able to recover as a society. So folks, it's critical, and it's hard. Once again, like at my high school reunion, there's part of me that wanted to just sort of stand up on the bar and say, what are we doing? That we're having this nice little party, but our whole society is on the brink of collapse. But of course I didn't do that, because that would have been a bummer for everybody. But it's still true, all right? Even though those of us who understand the real threats of environmental collapse and global warming aren't standing on bars screaming at the top of our lungs, that doesn't mean that the danger is not there. I don't want no oil spoiling my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, love creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun nuclear powers got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!